So, Stephanie, thank you for joining me today for a conversation. This conversation is really important because we're talking about the idea of good enough parenting. And I think a lot of us are really striving for that because a lot of us at this point in time are under a lot of stress with what's going on around us, with everything on our plate. So, the idea of good enough parenting is important. And it's also hard to figure out exactly how to do it.
Absolutely.
So I'd love if we could start off with an introduction, if you could tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, first of all, Carolina, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today and to talk about good enough parenting and everything that's going to come up for us. So my name is Stephanie Sackerman. I am a mom. I am a former educator, and I am a mindful mom coach. And so just so everybody could kind of have an understanding of what that actually is, I am a certified wellness coach. I'm a certified mindfulness teacher, and I also am a certified positive discipline parent educator. And as a mindful mom coach, what I do is I support moms to give them what they want and what they need. And that is to be present for themselves and for their families so that they can respond instead of react, to teach them how to show up as the mom, the partner, the woman that they wish to be, and ultimately to build a motherhood and a life that they love living. So that is a little bit about me.
I love that because I think for a lot of parents, we want to come into parenting and we want to come into our roles in the relationships we have in our families, knowing that we go there with thoughtful intent, that we make decisions out of the right place so that there isn't guilt and there isn't shame, and it's really with thoughtful intent. So let's talk about shame and guilt. What is mom shame? What is mom guilt? What is the difference between the two?
I'm really glad that you're asking this question, especially right away, because I think that this term mom guilt is thrown around a lot. And to be honest with you, for maybe 2 years of my motherhood, I thought that that was what I was experiencing. When in fact, I was actually experiencing mom shame. And so, um, mom guilt and mom shame are really two different things. So, guilt is more about a behavior or an event or an action. So you made a mistake, you messed up, but what follows that is thoughts like I'll do better next time, or I'll learn from this experience. But mom shame is different. Um, it's less about the behavior, and it's more about how we feel about ourselves. So we might make a mistake, but instead of saying, oh, that was just a one-off thing, I'm going to do this next time, I'm going to do this differently, I'm going to grow and learn from this, it's a i'm not I'm not a good mom, or I'm always making mistakes, or what's wrong with me, I'm just not good enough. um, and when I think about my own self-talk as a new mom, which sometimes we're not even really aware of the way that we're speaking to ourselves. But that dialogue that I was having day in and day out, it wasn't about just one event. It was me stringing together events and experiences to make me feel a certain way about myself, to make me feel like um, I wasn't the mom who I wanted to be, or I wasn't a good mom. And it didn't matter what anyone else was telling me. It didn't hold the weight of what I was saying to myself. And, I work with moms, I coach moms one on one. And when it's appropriate, when it pertains to the mom, I'll ask them, are you experiencing mom guilt, or are you experiencing mom shame? And even if I feel very strongly in my heart that it is mom shame, what I've noticed is that we don't want to admit that it's shame, because that is one of those feelings that, even though more and more of us are learning that all feelings are important and all feelings have value. We don't like to feel shame. We don't like to feel that way, that uncomfortable feeling. Um, and then what's unfortunate is that when our brain is in that shame mode, the parts of our brain that can help us learn or grow, they shut down. And so we sort of get stuck in this spiral of shame. And I think that that happens to a lot of new moms. I know it happened for me.
It definitely happened for me as well. I like the way that you put it. I think I spent a lot of time thinking about this as well as a new parent. And what I realized with help and coaching from others is that you can't take action on shame
Right.
because it's judgment you're putting on yourself.
Yeah.
It's sort of blanket judgment. You can take action on guilt because it's looking at a past behavior and assessing that you should have done something differently. And so
Yeah.
next time you can do something differently. But you can't do anything about shame unless you just decide that you're not going to feel shame anymore, or you're not going to judge yourself anymore, because it doesn't actually lead to anything worthwhile.
Right. And that's so hard to do. But you're right. With guilt, we're able to sort of detach ourselves from it so that we can respond differently. With shame, it's inherent, you know. Um, so I think that makes it really tricky.
So what does it mean to be a good enough parent? Because I think that's also, for me, the mom shame was also triggered by seeing images of parenting,
Mm-hmm.
of what kind of a parent I should be, these honestly idealized images of
Yeah.
parent.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean to be a good enough parent?
Okay. So the term good enough mother was coined by Donald Winnicott in the 50s. And I think that it's so brilliant and it really is pertinent, especially right now. Um, so as humans, we are flawed beings. So, one of the ways that I practice mindfulness is with self-compassion. And self-compassion has taught me so many lessons. The most important lesson, I think, though, well, maybe it's not the most important, but it's definitely up there, is that we are all human and we have these shared experiences. There's this shared humanity. No one is going to be perfect. Everyone is going to make a mistake. Everybody is going to struggle. It's part of our human experience. And I think that we forget that because, as you said, we see these beautiful images on social media of what motherhood should look like. Or even if you're looking in a magazine, it could be a parenting magazine. We see these advertisements for what a mom or a dad or parents or whatever the family may look like, but what they're doing and how they have it all together and that they have it all the time. And when I think about this term good enough parenting, for me it's so liberating because what it means is that we don't have to strive to be perfect all the time. Because if we are always in that position of striving to be perfect, all that we're going to do is lead ourselves to failure. And that is what then can bring about all those uncomfortable feelings of guilt or shame or whatever you may have, disappointment, anger, resentment, all of that stuff. And so Winnicott's idea of this good enough parent was actually giving us permission to mess up, to make a mistake, really ultimately to be human. Because what he found was that when our children see us make a mistake, it's actually something that benefits them. And so I'm certainly, I don't want anyone to think that I'm endorsing, irresponsible parenting or irresponsible behavior. But what I'm saying is that it's good for our kids to see us make mistakes. We are teaching them that we don't have to be perfect, that no one is perfect, that it's okay to mess up, and that it's about the response to that mistake that can be really valuable. And so I think it's really freeing. And I think that now more than ever, parents need to remind themselves, because this is not something that comes naturally to us, because we've been raised, many of us, at least I was, to think that, our parents are always doing the right things. They know it all. And I mean, now as adults, we know that that's not so, of course, because they were human too, and they all made mistakes. But I think that it's more about doing the best that you can in the moment.
Tell me a little more about the idea of how you respond to the mistake. So when you make the mistake, which you will,
Yes.
how do you have that interaction with your child who has seen you make that mistake? How do you do that in a way that is constructive for the relationship and that is a learning for the child, and I assume for you as a parent as well?
Yeah. So, first of all, I don't want anyone to think it's easy, because taking ownership when you've made a mistake is extremely difficult, and I think it's something that we have to work on for many of us. And I also think that it's hard sometimes to apologize. I don't think I'm alone in that, but I think that it's in that repair that our children learn some of these really important lessons. So in positive discipline, they call it recovery. So there's 3 R's of it. So the first is to recognize your mistake and to take responsibility for it without blaming anyone or anything. It's very easy as a human to make an excuse, right? That sort of makes the behavior not so disappointing, right? But it's really about saying, you know what, mommy made a mistake. Mommy said something she shouldn't have said, or mommy did this, or whatever the scenario may be. But to just say, here's my error. Then the second step is to reconcile with an apology. And so I'll tell my son, you know what, I'm really sorry. And then the third part is to resolve the problem together. So, to I don't want to say fix it, but yeah, it's to work together to rebuild. And I think that that's so beautiful, because when I do that with my son, I'm reminding him again, like, mommy's not perfect. I'm not trying to hide it. I'm not perfect. And it's okay. I don't expect for you to be perfect. I don't want him to ever think that I'm holding him to that unattainable standard. And it shows that it's important to take ownership, because it really is easy to try to blame something on somebody else, but that's not the right thing to do. And then the last part is it shows him that he's worthy of an apology. So it teaches him what a respectful relationship looks like. And I think that is just a really wonderful way to grow your bond with your child. And when I've had a situation where I've apologized to my son, it's just okay. And then we go ahead and we move forward. And it's not like the earth has, tilted on its orbit. It's not like my son's looking at me differently. I think maybe he's looking at me even more lovingly, because he's appreciating that, you know what, he's not the only person who makes mistakes. Mom and dad do too. And that's really freeing.
I have to say, this is something that resonates with me, because I apologize to my children when I make mistakes. Not every time. I do my best. Sometimes I don't want to apologize. But now,
Yeah. I get
and
that.
everyone has those moments. But now we're at the stage where he will actually ask me for an apology, and he will say, "Mommy, that hurt my feelings. You should apologize." And it's great. By the way, he's not always right all the time when he asks, because sometimes I say, "Well, you just hit your sister, and you should not have hit your sister. So what I did was okay." But other times he's right. And it definitely, when it becomes a habit, it means that there's always an opening for you to admit to each other that you're not perfect, and for you, as you mentioned, to find a way to work it out together. And
Yeah.
then you both feel comfortable with the outcome.
Yeah. And I love that too, that, your son is learning his worth. He's learning to advocate for himself, and I think that that is a really valuable life skill for our children to learn. And I think that too for parents, I mean, we don't need to carry around the guilt of I just yelled at my child, and really I wasn't yelling because of what they did. It was really because what happened maybe 10 minutes ago when I was on a call, or because I realized that I did this or that. We don't have to carry all of that disappointment in ourselves around, because when we do reconcile with them and we do that repair, then we're able to let that go. And that's when we can be truly present with our children. And I think that that is probably the gift that good enough parenting gives us, because if we're constantly thinking about what we could have done differently, or what we could have done better, or the way that we wish we had responded, then we're not going to be present with our kids. We're going to be stuck thinking about the past, and our kids deserve that presence that we can give them, and we deserve it too. So I think I think it kind of all goes hand in hand. And I think it's a really beautiful, I'm so glad that you're saying this term out loud so we can just sort of shout it out to everybody, because right now I think that we need to remember it, especially.
So let's talk about how we actually do it right now, because many parents now have children at home, they're homeschooling at home while trying to work.
Yeah.
The external environment with everything that's going on is creating a lot of extra stress for very obvious reasons, but that comes into the home, whether
Right.
you are directly impacted by, from a health or a financial perspective, whether or not you are still impacted, even if you're not directly impacted, because that all of that stress comes into the home.
Right.
And most likely you have your children at home and you're trying to work. It's
Right.
just an incredible amount that's being asked of parents right now.
Right.
It's also if you have the ability, I think, to be a mindful parent, to focus on good enough parenting, those are the skills that are going to help you carry yourself and your family in this kind of stress. But how do you start? How do you take these concepts and start actually living them today, right now, in this situation, especially if you've never consciously done this before?
I think that I always tell this to my moms. The first step is awareness. But I think that it needs to be this judgment free kind of awareness. So when I teach mindfulness, it's not just about bringing your attention to this present moment. It's bringing your attention to this moment with an attitude of kindness. And I think that when we have that awareness, without the need to judge, without the need to try to fix or change, when we just start noticing, that right there is how we begin to do it. You know, as humans, we have so many thoughts in our heads throughout the day. A study was done, I think it was the National Science Foundation. It was in 2005. So, it's a good deal of time ago, but they found that on average, humans have about 60,000 thoughts. Now, I'm giving this statistic off the top of my head. So, in case there's any fact checkers
Is
out
that
there,
per day or?
it's per day. So,
Wow.
I believe that 95% of those thoughts, I hope I'm not mixing these two up. I believe it's 95% of the thoughts are the same thoughts every day that we have. And 80% of those are negative thoughts. They're negative messages that we're sending to ourselves. And so whether we're conscious of it or not, because so much of our brain is subconscious, but we have these thoughts all the time, these messages that we're sending to ourselves. And so when we pause and open our awareness, but we have that kindness piece, that's where we start to really notice, because that's when the moms I work with, they start to realize their self-talk. Because if you're beating yourself up all the time, you're not going to feel very good. And then when you respond to someone else, you're really not going to be responding. You're going to be like reacting in a way that doesn't feel as good to you. So the first thing that I always say to do is to start noticing, because when you notice, that's when you can start being more compassionate with yourself. So, when I teach self-compassion, it's responding to yourself as you would to a friend who messed up or who made a mistake. And when I think about how many of us humans, and maybe even yourself, you can think about this too, but when we make a mistake, how do we respond to ourselves? What do we say? What do we think? And when we can flip that, and instead of beating ourselves up or putting ourselves down or judging ourselves, when we can actually respond to ourselves with kindness and with compassion and with more grace, that changes everything. It is so transformative. You know, these situations, this everything that we've been experiencing over the last 5 or 6 months, really depending on where you are, it could even be longer than that. There's no way to change what's going on. There's no way to control it. There's no way to fix things. The only thing that we can do is to realize that this is really hard, and that's the mindfulness piece of self-compassion. So like really feeling what you're feeling. So noticing, bringing that awareness. This is really hard. I'm really struggling. And then we bring in that shared humanity piece, which is other parents, other women, everyone is experiencing what I'm feeling. And there's a lot of comfort in that. And then the last part is to respond to ourselves with kindness. And so that may be a kind phrase, just placing your hand on your heart so you get the oxytocin flowing already, which feels good. But just saying to yourself, you know what, may I just be compassionate with myself? Can I just be patient with myself? Can I just be understanding with myself? And when we do this and we grow this practice of our own self-compassion, that's when we start to increase our compassion for others. And I think that it seems so small, right? Doesn't it seem so simple? And yet it just can change everything.
It is a simple concept. It's hard.
It's so hard. I know.
Once you start doing it, I agree. It becomes so much easier, not just for yourself to experience parenthood, but it becomes easier to be a more compassionate parent, because if you can forgive yourself, you can forgive your children.
Yeah.
You can set better expectations for them if you can set better expectations for yourself.
Yes.
And along those lines, one of the things that I always ask myself when I'm working towards something, like when I'm working towards self-compassion, let's say, I always ask myself, what are the things that I have to believe about myself to be able to actually do that? What are the things I have to internalize to actually, before I'm actually able to practice self-compassion, for example? So my question for you is, what do we have to believe about ourselves as parents, and what do we have to believe about our children to have the right mindset, to be able to be good enough parents and to be able to be present parents?
I think that we need to believe that we are 100% lovable and that we're worthy of love, and that we are worthy of the compassion ourselves. And I think that that is really hard. I think a lot of us have blocks when it comes to that. That's why I think that so many people around the globe struggle with feelings of self-worth. But I think that that's where it starts. And I think that when we look at our children, like my son, 100%, he deserves all of the love in the world, but I am not holding him to that perfect standard. If he has to be perfect to be, to get that love, to be deserving of that love, then he's never going to get there, you know? But the thing is that he doesn't have to be perfect because he's human. And I love him for everything that he is, for whatever, flaws or struggles he's going to experience. And I think that we have to really accept that within ourselves. Does that answer your question?
It does. And it makes me think of one more thing, which is when we are in those moments where we just feel emotionally overwhelmed as parents, or we can't be present in a way, we can't be in that situation in a way that feels good, that feels like it's the right thing. And those, because we're all good, let's be realistic, we're all going to have them. We're all with each other,
Oh,
all
yeah.
dealing with all this stress. We would have had them before the current situation. We're
Right.
definitely going to have them in the current state of events where we feel overwhelmed. What is the right thing to do in that moment? And what is the right thing to believe in that moment? And I think that's what I want to leave the parents who are listening to this with, what they can actually do in that moment where they're overwhelmed.
I think that it's probably different for each person because as humans, we have different ways that we feel comforted and loved. For some people, it might be an affirmation that they can say to themselves. For other people, it might be more of like a physical touch that they could even do for themselves. But I think that in the moment, we have to bring ourselves to presence and we have to pause. And I would invite every parent to take a breath. And in that space that you're creating, to choose how you want to respond. And it could be how you're going to respond to yourself. So it could be the words that you're going to say in your head to yourself. It could be the way that you're going to respond to your child or to your partner. And I think that in that space, there's a lot of power that we as humans forget that we have, especially when we're in these really stressful, really overwhelming types of situations. We forget that we can actually pause, come to the present moment fully, feeling our body, noticing our breath, and then we actually get to choose what we're going to do next. And I think that when we can do that, what we're going to do next is going to feel a lot better.
So basically, give yourself the space to take a moment for yourself.
Yeah, I love how you put that.
It's one of these things that someone told me about this maybe in the last couple of years, maybe a couple of years ago. And it's incredibly simple and it's been a lifesaver for me and it's simple. Sometimes I don't know how to respond in the moment as a parent. Let's say one of my children is having a meltdown and I feel frustrated because I don't think they should be having a meltdown because nothing happened. In reality, they might be tired, they might be hot, they might be hungry, they might just be young children, which they are. And I give myself the permission to leave the room. There's, of course, making sure they're safe and I can hear them and maybe I'm just directly outside the door.
Yeah.
But I give myself permission in those moments to leave the room and give myself a couple minutes to decompress and calm down before I go back in.
And that's so important. And you know what? I talk when I teach mindfulness about the words respond and react, because I used to think that they were the same thing, but they're in fact so different. When we just say something or do something, that is us reacting. It's like a human like impulse, right? But when we can respond, that's when we can just we have this ability, this power, this opportunity to decide, how will this situation how can it unfold differently? And I think that what you just said is so spot on, because sometimes what we need to do to respond better is to just walk away and to just let ourselves get centered and get grounded, because if we are not regulated, our there's no way that our children are going to be regulated. We're not going to help them calm down because we ourselves are so keyed up. And so that is a wonderful tip.
Thank you. It's hard, isn't it? I mean, it's so rewarding, and we get the chance to learn about ourselves so much, but it definitely takes practice. Maybe saying it's hard is the wrong word. It has to be learned.
Yes, yes. And I think that too, we have to unlearn what we have usually done. And for some of us, it's the way that we have reacted for years, and so we have to just be conscious enough to notice. And I think that at the root of that is mindful presence.
So I think that the key messages we're going to leave parents with is, one, give yourself the permission to have a breath, to step out of a situation before taking action. I think the second thing is, you don't have to be perfect, and it's actually impossible to be perfect. So just try to be good enough and accept that you will make mistakes. And I think the third thing I heard was, when you make mistakes, admit it to your children, admit it to your family, and be willing to look at yourself and say, I'm human, I made a mistake. Let's work through this together within reason, obviously.
Right.
There's a difference between making a human mistake and doing something that clearly is, not appropriate as a parent.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the normal mistakes everyone makes every day.
Yeah.
Is there anything I missed? All of this is just so important. Is there anything that I missed?
Yeah, I think that those are the big three. And if I could just add one thing to it, I would say to remember, which it's hard, right? It's one of these other things where it seems so easy, but it's actually quite difficult to do. But to do your best, to remember that everyone is doing the best that they can. Our children are doing the best that they can. They're suffering too. They're struggling too. But they're doing the best they can. Our partners, they're doing the best they can too. They're doing what they feel they need to do, what's safe, what's best for the family, and that we're doing our best. And that's the lesson that we teach our children. Do your best, right? That's enough. And it is enough. It's more than enough. And I just wish that we remembered that, and that we really lived that truth. Because I think that would make our motherhoods, our parenthoods that much more beautiful.
Very well said. This was so incredible. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for having this conversation with me.
You're welcome. I'm so excited that we had a chance to talk, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to share and to have this beautiful dialogue.